Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. My name is Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat member for Baffins and South Copner and North Milton, and I'm also the Cabinet member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. Please be assured, I have to do a script, so apologies if you're watching on the webcam, I have to run a script just to make sure we run through all the safety measures. So please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. This has included a request for all attendees to have taken a lateral flow test within 24 hours, the use of the NHS track and trace app, 2 metre social distancing and the wearing of face coverings when not seated. There's also a one-way system here in the Guildhall, but I think will be okay. Limited public seating has been made available, for which members of the public, thank you very much for coming. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. The public seating area, you'll be delighted to know, is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting, so the makeup you may have tried might not work. I would ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face covering unless otherwise. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room. Public gathering by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble. It says by Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square, but I think we know roughly where that is. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who's signed in at the reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of the meeting. I've got to remind people again that this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they don't wish to be recorded. So please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. So that's the safety protocols done. I'm going to go left to right, just so everybody knows where they're going. Starting with you, Anna.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you.
Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director, Building Services.
And then I will start with the back row and then move inwards.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director, Housing.
Mark Fitch, Head of Local Authority Housing.
Merrick Javaskas, IT Business Partner for Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Thank you for coming, Mark. A fine place. Thank you very much.
Councillor Scott Pate-Harris, Conservative Spokesperson.
Thank you.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager.
Alan Denford, Group Accountant from Finance.
Thank you. Daniel.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward and Labour Spokesperson for Housing.
And last but by no means least,
Maria Cole, Residents Consortium.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So on the agenda we have got, I've done the risk assessment, there are no apologies for absence as far as I know. Does anyone have any declarations of interest, whether they are prejudicial, personal or anything else? Cal?
A personal interest, and I'm a council tenant.
Fine. My mother also lives in a council block, but I understand that's not a prejudicial, personal or anything else interest, so I'm saying that purely in interest of transparency. So now we move to the main item of the agenda, which is the council housing budget, which Cal, Scott and I have been quoted in the press on, I hope accurately. With regards to that, just to say that since that discussion, I said in the press that we were working on a plan to try and see if we can lower the rent rise. That plan will be presented at some stage during the meeting. But firstly, I just wanted Wayne to explain the rationale behind the report.
Thank you. So the report you've got in front of you is the council housing budget for...
Excuse me, Chair, quickly before you do that, did you say you're putting additional information into the meeting?
I was intending to.
Well,
do you have a problem with that? If you have, that's fine.
Well, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can put additional... I mean, because effectively, if it influences the report, you're effectively rewriting the report in the meeting.
Okay.
You I don't think you can rewrite because you have to remember this is a published report. So the published report goes out to the public, not just us. So the public have time to scrutinise it and then effectively come here and give a deputation. So if you introduce new information that then influences the report, effectively you are excluding members of the public from that right to that information until the meeting's date, so they have no chance to scrutinise it. Effectively, what you'll be doing is rewriting the report in the meeting, which I believe you cannot do.
Okay, I understand that point, Scott, and I think there is a potential compromise coming forwards, but I would argue that we've had council meetings whereby the budgets that has been put forwards has been altered in light of information that has been presented at the meeting. I mean, I'm happy for this plan, which would change a couple of the recommendations to be presented ideally to Maria, you and Cal.
I mean, I'm happy for you to proceed, but I'd actually rather you check with the monitoring officer first, because there has been an incident, for example, I'm going to just use an example of your colleague in Traffic and Transportation, who effectively tried to rewrite a report in the meeting, and which was seen as a constitutional problem, and effectively had to sit out of the meeting for that item, because what effectively has happened, the report has been changed because of the material evidence that's been produced. You know, effectively, this should have been produced earlier, and should have been on the order paper a lot earlier, for example, on the website, so people have public to access it. No one's had a right to scrutinise it, and now you're asking myself and Councillor Corkery to scrutinise it on the spot, which is not fair to either of us, and it's not fair to any member of the public.
I understand your point, but as we've noted, and I understand the thing that you mentioned, and I know why that particular issue was raised, which is definitely not this. No, I'm not intending to try and pull the wool over people's eyes, but it does flow from discussions that the three of us have had. We have what's called briefing meetings before we have decision-making meetings to try and be more open rather than force people into decisions. And it does flow from some of the information that was talked about there,
Yes,
Scott.
with the greatest respect to that is, if it's open and transparent, why are we seeing it now and not last week when there would have been an opportunity for myself and Councillor Corkery to see that information? And you have to remember, this is a rent setting, so you're effectively, this is for members of the public. So members of people that live in those blocks, for example, have got no chance to come along and scrutinise the information that's going to be put in front of them, that's going to be laid out today by the officers. That is the fundamental part of this. It's a published report, and you're going to be making a decision based on the information that Wayne is going to be producing. So Wayne is producing new information which is going to influence that report. That has had no scrutiny from myself, Councillor Corkery, all members of the public, all members of the Residents' Consortium who are going to be seeing it for the first time. That opens it to challenge, and that opens it to call in. Now, if you want to go into that territory, I'm more than happy to do that. You know, it's no skin off my nose, because there are processes to follow. And if you do this, you are changing the process, and you're actually changing the manner of the decision.
Well, as I said, I understand your point, and I hope you understand that I'm trying. So as we have no monitoring officer here, James.
If this helps the discussion, Councillor Sanders, I think what you're referring to is a question that was posed to us at the briefing, which was, could we look at an alternative proposal for the parking garage sites, which the officers have done and can present to you, should you wish to ask that question. And the other question that I think came out of the briefing was the possibility of adjusting the rent increase, and we're happy to answer the questions that you may have should you wish to pose those. The information in the report substantially isn't changing. It's how we answer the questions that you pose, I think, is what is at play here.
Under this understanding, if there's information that's going to be circulated in this chamber which is influencing that report decision, effectively the report has been changed, because that information should have been published. If it's not published, no one has the ability to scrutinise it, and that is where it falls down. It's about scrutiny, you know, of the actual budget process, not so much the information that's coming forward. The information can be sound fine financially, but it's the ability to scrutinise it. And by not allowing members of the public to scrutinise it effectively is what you're doing is not the right thing to do.
Cal.
Chair, can I make a suggestion that we hear whatever the proposals are and then make a judgment about whether we're comfortable at that point? Because it may be that it's not significant enough that people see it to be an issue.
I think you're right, Councillor. It's not so much the significance of it, it's the manner of the process of what we're doing. The process has not been followed to the letter of our constitution, and that is the issue. And I think Councillor Sanders knows that. He knows where I'm coming from, because effectively your residents don't have a chance to scrutinise what's coming forward. You know, had they have come forward and read it, they might have come forward and said, actually, this is an alternative proposal, it's a good idea, I'd like to give a deputation to support it. You know, so that level of influence is not being allowed because we're seeing it late.
And whilst I understand your point, Scott, no, it's okay, I understand your point. There are two things. Firstly, we're going to be sitting in a budget in 4 weeks' time, which is going to be even more money than this. And there will be amendments that will be tabled on the day, which nobody sees. I know we've asked to let the city see every single party's approach to the budget because we think that's right. Through the same process, Scott, we could say, well, let's open up the opposition budget amendments to scrutiny. I know that's not popular with different groups, and I understand that, but I think that's the logic of where you're going. And I think I agree with Cal in that I think the first thing is to actually hear what's going, so everyone else can hear what's going on, and then they can actually put forward their own suggestions going forward. But I understand your process. I understand your concerns, Scott, but there are other things that it could also apply to, which I could raise, but I choose not to. Wayne.
Sorry, I don't know if this helps. So the report that's coming before you is brought to you by James and Chris Ward, and there's a delegation to you to make a decision about what you do about the budget, how you set rents and how you set charges that are within this report. So the officers are presenting this report to you, you're considering it, and then you make a decision based on this. If you choose to do something else, it's within your delegated powers to do that. But I'm not the monitoring officer, I'm an accountant, so you might need to check it, but that's how I understand it. And there have been in the past meetings where changes have been made. And I think Councillor Corkery's suggestion of let's hear the report and then talk about it, but you can certainly change the recommendation because you're delegated to do that.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Wayne.
Shall I just represent the report?
Yes, please.
Right, okay. Right, so in front of you there's the report for the council housing budget for 2023, and it asks you to note the forecast revenue outturn for this current financial year, where we originally forecast that we would have a £1.2 million deficit in this current year, and we're forecasting that to be £1 million. We are asking that, or recommending that dwelling rents are increased in line with the maximum amount we're allowed to through the social rent policy of 4.1%. Then appendixes 5, 6, 7 and 8, you'll see proposals for changes to general service charges, sheltered housing charges, laundry charges, heating charges, and in appendix 9 around the garages and parking sites. And then you'll also see in appendix 3 we set out the forecast budget, how it would look based on the recommendations within this report. So in coming to our decision around increasing rents by 4.1%, so the 4.1% comes from we're allowed to increase rents by CPI in September 2021, which was 3.1%, plus another percent, so 4.1%. So that's currently a little under what December's inflation was, around about 5%. In the past year, we have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of energy charges, particularly around communal areas, which has almost doubled, with £700,000 to £800,000. We've seen our materials prices, and that's a fair old chunk of our budget, almost sort of 60% of our budget is linked to capital works and repairs. That's increased on average between 5 and 15%, and still continues to increase. And also with the pay award, so we're setting the budget today in January, and we don't know what the pay award will be for 22-23, and that represents about a third of our cost base is linked to staffing, so we have no certainty over that. So in the report and in Appendix 3, we're forecasting that increase will be around about 2%. We also have no final clarity on what this current year's pay award will be. So for 4.1% increase, we are estimating that the in-year surplus will be £400,000, which is about 0.5% of our overall cost base. I'm just going to touch on some other items. So what this means is, in an average rent, and that's in one of the appendices here, Appendix 4, you'll see that the average rent will go from £89.62 to £93.04. That's a £3.42 a week increase, or £178 in the year. The increase applies to social rent. Those who are paying affordable rent will not pay any more for their rent than the local housing allowance within Portsmouth. Service charges are due to move for high and a low rate. So the low rate applies for those that live in houses, high rate are those in flats, but between 14 and 70p a week. The sheltered houses charges are again set out in Appendix 6, and there are increases between 56p and £3.36, depending on the level of category that housing that they're living in. No change to laundry charges. Heating charges are a little bit more complicated this year. So those who get their heating through electricity, and I think those are at Tipton and Edgbaston House, there will be no change this year, and that's on the basis that the council have been able to fix those energy prices for this coming year. Unfortunately, with gas, we're not able to do that, as the contract has come to an end where we had our fixed price for that type of heating. It would be nonsensical for us to enter into a fixed contract when we're at record rates of prices. So at the moment, the report suggests that those increases are likely to be around about 15% for those that live in properties where they have gas. The principle is still the same, where the council tries to recover what it costs to provide energy, so it's not subsidised. The 15% charge sounds high, and I think when you look at what the general market are experiencing, and private households, where they've seen charges go up, almost 100%. 15% isn't good, but it's probably a lot less than many of us are experiencing at the moment. We're suggesting that garage and parking sites are increased by 3.1%, which is the CPI in September. As I mentioned, that would leave us with an in-year surplus next year of 410,000, which is quite a small margin on a £90 million cost base. And as kind of reported before, the largest income generating method that we have is free dwelling rents. By about 76% of all of our income comes from that, and the rest of it is from service charge, which effectively just recovers the cost of providing those services. I just want to talk about the consultation that we went through. So back in September, we held an event over at the Somers Town Hub where we did a line-by-line review, and some of the residents who attended that are here tonight. And we went through literally the budget line by line. It was quite a good session, well attended, and it was very interactive. We then published a suggestion of what charges could increase by in the winter edition of House Talk, and that was delivered to all residents, all 15,000 of our residents. We then held another session on the 2nd of December 2021 at Residents Association, where we talked through the pressures that the HRA were on under, and our forecast budget at the time, and potential changes, and the fact that there could be, the maximum amount that we could possibly charge at that time. And obviously pointed out to residents that it wasn't until this meeting that the decision is actually made. We then had some feedback from that process and a House Talk when we had 11 respondents, and the summary of those responses are within the appendix. And then we had a final session on the 6th of January with residents again, where we fed back some of the responses that we'd had, and then reinforced potentially what would be in this report. That's all I have to say about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Wayne. Before I go to the residents and to Cal and to Scott, there is a cost of living crisis that exists for people, including many of our tenants. And I've been concerned about that rent level being very high for those people, particularly those people who are in work and on housing benefit, which is around about a third of our tenants. Is there some way in which we can, in some small way, address that without screwing the budget over?
So the report suggests the maximum amount, and that does give us a small surplus of £400,000. What we're trying to articulate in this report is there is a certain degree of risk to us, and 4.1% isn't even the amount that CPI is running at today, but it's the maximum amount we're allowed to put it up. If we wanted to increase rents so that we end up with a balanced budget position next year, so we don't run with a deficit, and you don't set the budget at a deficit, you'd have to increase rents by 3.5%. That would give you a balanced budget.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that clarification. Maria.
Actually, I think Wayne may have answered the question I was going to ask, but it's just, what would happen if we landed up with a deficit in the HRA?
Okay, so if we had a deficit within the HRA, then we'd have to use our reserves. And in the report, it shows those reserves are 23 million. Yes, that's right. Sorry. I've got a lot of numbers in front of me. So it's 23 million. So effectively, the deficit will be met from that reserve. The problem that we have is that as an organisation, we can't continue to set a budget at a deficit. And I know the last 4 years we've been running at a deficit. And if you do that, eventually you will end up depleting your reserves completely, which is why we strive to at least balance the budget each year. And when we set the budget, we're thinking about the 30-year business plan, and with kind of an aging stock that we're eventually going to have to replace at some point. Those reserves are going to be needed when we're going to have to do those works later on.
Did you have any more questions at all, Maria?
Well, the only other question I had, and it's not sort of money-wise, on page 13, it was saying that the units sold were about 70. I think previous years it was up to 100. So does that mean that we're actually selling less on the right to buy?
Yeah, it's about average for the last sort of 3 or 4 years since I've been in post. It's been around about between 70 and 90 that we've had be sold through right to buy.
Was that it? Okay, thank you for that. Hello, madam. Hello. Did you have any questions at all? If not, that's absolutely fine. Feel free. You've been kind enough to come, so...
I'm hoping it's relevant.
Ooh, I don't know.
Is there any reason why there seems to be more money spent on certain blocks than others, as in Wilmcote House? It seems everything available has gone to Wilmcote House. They have all this amazing heating system, security and everything. As you know, where I live, we're just left floundering with nothing.
I can't answer the first part of your question. I will ask Mr. Hughes, who's in charge of that sort of stuff, to answer that the first part of your question. And then the second part of your question, to me, it was pretty clear that the courts needed improving. When my party came back into power in 2018, it was clear that we wanted to do something to improve the courts. We know many of the houses in the area where you live are lovely, and people are quite happy to live there, but we also know that the outsides need significant improvement. And that is why in February 2020, or March 2020, I agreed to spend, I think it's about £3 million, trying to improve what we know as the courts, which includes the block where you live. Partly to do that, there have been some delays, partly due to something called the virus, but we're hoping to try and get that done precisely for the reasons that you say, because we do want to spread it out. So money has been set aside for your block, and was set aside a couple of years ago.
Sorry, the thing is, the news are reporting that we went to an outside meeting in July, wasn't it, Cal? And they were on about taking away a bridge, walkways, to stop antisocial, which it doesn't, because we have the antisocial. Doesn't matter how many bridges they take away, they will still get into our block. But we have tried to say that taking the bridges away is going to be the worst thing for us, because when our lift breaks down, which it does quite often, I'm 75 this year. I live on the top floor. I can't get up the stairs, and so I would be cut off.
I understand the specifics of your point. Following a council question that Councillor Corkery, if memory serves me right, gave to me several moons ago, last summer, I met with Councillor Corkery and Councillor Mellor to discuss these issues. I know they've raised issues with me, as they've perfectly have a right to as ward councillors, and I know that I pass that on to the team. So I don't know whether James or Meredith wish to comment, or whether we're getting too much into specifics here.
Yeah, I can comment, Councillor Sanders, thank you. Yeah, thank you. We have identified a significant amount of work that's going to be done to the courts, and you would have seen in the news, etc., the information that we've put out there. I think the project, from recollection, is at tender at the moment, and we're waiting for the price work to come back. The scheme is programmed over the next 2.5 years into 2024. And there's a significant amount of work we'll be doing. We'll be doing the entrance doors on the blocks of flats, improving the decoration, improving security, lighting, etc. And the last phase will be looking at the removal of the walkways. Now that work hasn't been tendered yet, and hasn't been cast in stone. So there's still work that we need to do, because the first phases will dictate to us really the success of all the other measures that we want to do. And obviously taking away the walkways will be, the last decision that we will make after we've learnt how successful all the other measures we've done. We'll also work very closely with the local area housing office, because issues around antisocial antisocial behaviour and some of the problems that the state does have are not just technical problems that we can solve with building solutions. There's engagement with residents, working with young people, etc. So there's a number of initiatives that will be done at the courts to improve the blocks.
Thank you, Meredith. James, did you have anything to add as the overall director of the project?
Yeah, I was just going to say that a paper will be coming back to this decision meeting in March, which will set out the capital programme for all of the housing stock. So there'll be an opportunity then to have a look at how the capital money is going to be spent to improve the housing stock. And that's perhaps the place and time to talk about, why particular blocks are being targeted, etc. But very happy to go through that with you nearer the time.
That's right. I realise, colleagues, not strictly about the budget, but I thought you had the grace to come along, so I was interested to see if you had any particular issues. So thank you very much for that. And as James says, it will come back here because we're very keen to make sure it's right, because very little has happened for very long, and we want to try and change that. I'll return to the budget, if I may. Cal.
Thank you, Darren. I have got a few outstanding questions. I know we've had the opportunity to kind of discuss them in briefings beforehand, but I've got a few others that have popped up, if I may, before getting to any comments. The first is that, obviously, we're talking about a significant amount of money that's been proposed here today, and I know that there will also, in addition, be the capital budget being brought forward. I guess I'm thinking the context that we're in as a council, as a city, as a world in terms of the climate crisis and the work that we need to be doing to reduce emissions across the board. We know that housing is a significant contributor to global warming. And I guess the question in my mind is, how much from the budget that's being proposed today is being allocated towards the decarbonisation of the social housing stock in Portsmouth?
Meredith or James or Wayne?
I refer back to the information that James gave to the last question, that when we go forward through the capital programme, that's where the significant investment that we want to do in the housing stock, that's where it'll be articulated. So it'll be the next report that comes in March.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. I'm also aware that we've got this almost two-tier rent regime in Portsmouth and across the country. I know we wouldn't have chosen a situation as a result of government policy, but we have a majority of people who are on traditional council rents or social rents. We also have, I think it's around 2% of the stock on affordable rents, and these were people that moved into new build properties in recent years and perhaps also living in properties that have been bought back by the council. And those affordable rents often are quite a lot more than social rents, and you've potentially got two properties within the same block, one being having been owned by the council the whole time, one perhaps being bought back, two neighbours living in the same size property, where when one rent could be almost double the other. And I know that's the situation we're in and we've got to deal with it, but I'm aware, I'm kind of asking the question of what the impact on those two different households living side by side is going to be of increasing it. Because if we increase both their rents by 4.1%, one person in cash terms is paying a lot more because they're paying 4.1% of a bigger figure. So one thing that I've been keen to try and ask for consideration of as part of this process is whether we can in some way cap or reduce the percentage increase to those few people, those minority of people who are living in properties where their rents are a lot higher to begin with.
No, I understand that, and that's also one of the things that has been discussed as a result of the briefing discussions. Wayne, firstly, just to respond to Cal's point, and then secondly, any colleague, whether there are any other housing associations or any other local authorities which are pursuing this particular route, bearing in mind that no rent is going to be above the local housing allowance level.
Yeah, in my introduction of the report, I did say that anyone who is on affordable rent, their rent will be capped at the LHA rate.
And can you tell us how many of the residents that are currently living in affordable rent properties are already at or very near that LHA cap to make it relevant to this.
I think that might be a Wayne or Mark. You're in charge of local authority housing, so you might talk to some of these people.
Yeah, so I can tell you that of all of the tenants that we've got currently in affordable rent, 60% of those are in receipt of universal credit. There are 11% that are not in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit, and about 50% are below the local housing allowance, and 50% are actually at the local housing allowance rate, so they wouldn't get any increase at all. In fact, what we'll do is loosen rent because the service charges will go up, so the rent we can charge will be lower. But their rate won't change because they're actually at the LHA rate.
So we've still...
Please continue.
Yeah.
Please carry on asking.
From the answer I'm taking, we've got potentially half of the people that live in affordable rent properties will see their rent increase by 4.1%, and I guess that comes back to my original point of whether that's fair, bearing in mind they're already paying considerably more rent than perhaps their neighbour in a social rent tenancy.
Wayne.
No, that's not true. So no one who is one of our tenants will pay any more than the LHA rate when you take their rent and service charge combined, regardless of their benefit status.
But I'm talking about those households who are currently below the LHA cap, therefore there is wiggle room, for want of a better word, between their current rent and the LHA rate, so their rent could be increased by 4.1% and it not hit that cap. And I guess the question is a policy one of whether that's fair on those households.
I think there's a raft of, I mean, to my mind, I have looked at this issue. I've also looked at what what I've been told what other housing associations and other councils are doing, and that approach is not something local authorities have been doing. And these are councils, Labour, Conservative, others, who have not gone down that particular route. So there is a difficulty about a two-tier rent, and I understand your point, but it seems that, I mean, Scott in the paper said he didn't envy my position, and that's absolutely right, and that's absolutely right. And I think the least worst approach is to have the uniform increase, but with that LHA rate at the top, so that there's no sense that rents will be above housing benefits. Because the key thing I think we all want is to make sure people can afford things. And by having that cap, that is the least worst way of going about things. That sort of two-tier rent increase is perfectly understandable, but does create two-tier households. And actually only exacerbates the sense of two-tierness that you've put forward, in my view. But as I said, we have looked at that. I've got the officers to look at that approach, and the least worst option was to do a more uniform approach. No other authority, as far as we know, has actually adopted your approach. That's not to say it's wrong, but they just have not adopted your approach, and I'm sure they would have their own reasons for it. For us, it's the least worst in a cost of living crisis.
Thank you. I know that some of the larger housing associations have started to adopt a policy of converting properties from affordable rent to social rent in recognition of the lack of affordability of affordable rent. So I don't think it's something that's without precedent as a principle, but I appreciate that there's the situation we're in. And thank you for the answer. One of the other things that I've previously raised, I think, in the budget discussions last year as well as this year, is the potential to create some kind of hardship funding specifically for council tenants that is funded through the HRA in a similar way to some housing associations, for example, will have a pot of money that's there to help people if they might need new white goods or carpets, or if they've experiencing particular financial hardship. So the question I'm asking, I guess, is has any consideration been given to allocating funding towards a ring-fenced hardship fund for council tenants?
I firstly want to go to the officers, if I may, which would be a James or Mark or Paul thing.
So I'll start. So the answer to the question is there's no allocation within the budgets for such a hardship fund. However, what the paper and the recommendation does is preserve the services that we have currently in place, including money advisors that will be there to support residents with budgeting and other such issues. And also we are working hand in glove with Mark Sage, the Tackling Poverty Coordinator, to ensure that residents in the housing service access the grants that are available. I'll turn to Mark because I think there is a specific grant for people facing hardship which we can access.
Thank you. So yeah, as James says, we obviously do fund money advisors that support the housing officers and all of our tenants in terms of their own financial circumstances, maximising their income and consolidating debts and helping them manage their tenancies really. We do know that we make grant applications and support our tenants to make grant applications for Switched On Portsmouth, for energy vouchers and those sorts of things. So I think currently the local authority have spent about £28,000 worth of those grants, and probably a third of those go to our own tenants, so about £9,000. And we have got the household support discretionary grants, and again our own local authority tenants have probably been awarded about £60,000 worth of those to date, and obviously we do support the tenants through housing benefit, universal credit, and bidding for other grant funds available for those sorts of things, but we don't have anything internally ourselves currently.
Sorry, Maria.
I just wanted to say that when I was moving in October, I actually did get a grant from the DHP, discretionary housing money, towards my moving costs. So I was really grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, it's something we always continue to have under review. I know you've raised this point before, Cal. So the technical answer is yes. Is it being considered? It's always under permanent review. It's always being considered. But I think it is around the most effective way forwards. And it's particularly pertinent given the cost of living crisis that we face. So I understand that point. Something that's always under review. My view is if it is the best way of delivering something, it can be done. But I think at the moment, with the package of measures that we've got, there are other ways of delivering, again, what we both want, which is try and see people through tough times.
I think I've got one more question, if that's okay. I'm interested in the parking charges. I know that the proposal is for parking charges to increase by less than rent. So parking charges at, I think, 3.1% and rent at potentially 4.1%, maybe less, depends on your decisions today. Now, there's obviously different types of people that use the parking spaces on housing lands. A lot of them are council tenants and leaseholders that live in those blocks, and a lot of those people will need to drive for reasons of disability or work, etc. So clearly it's an important service to provide to those people, and I know that they do already get a slight discount on those. I'm curious about the people who don't necessarily need to park in those spaces. I'm thinking of people that perhaps commute into the centre of Portsmouth and choose to rent a space from the Housing Directorate because it's convenient for the civic officers or the university or whatever. And some of those people may well be on fairly decent incomes. I guess the question I would put to you, is it fair that we only increase the charges we're applying to people in those positions by 3.1% when we're increasing potentially the rents of the people that live in the houses that are adjacent to those spaces, that of course don't have any choice but to live in that house, as opposed to someone who could park somewhere else, by quite a lot more?
I think, Cal, you know my answer to that question because we've discussed this before. And having originally put in place that differential regime in 2014, because I was concerned around exactly those sorts of things, I've made it very clear to officers that if we can increase that differential, so again, we're not having disproportionate increases for our tenants, our leaseholders, and the people who live nearby. Because if, say, for instance, you're in Stamshaw and you're living near a housing block, or in Somerstown, where you've got 2 or 3 separate parking systems within 100 yards of each other, then it is absolutely important that we don't punish people who live nearby, but certainly those commuters who come in. Certainly, as you well know, I am very keen to see if there is a way whereby we can increase parking charges above the levels proposed in the report? Wayne?
So, parking charges traditionally we have increased by inflation, and the rate that's paid by people who are non-domiciled to that area, so not tenants, not leaseholders, is far greater than those ones that do live there. The issue we have is, particularly within the city centre, is there is competition for parking. So there's only so much you can put the charges up by before people then decide to start parking elsewhere, which would mean that the HRA effectively would lose money if people didn't choose to park there. There's a general uncertainty around commuters and what that looks like following COVID-19, which is why we said actually we'll put it up by 3.1%. What we have done is we've modelled the what an increase would look like if we looked at the nearest closest alternative, so the park and ride, which is £14 a week. And if we did that, that generates £8,400 a year in additional income to this budget that we're setting at the moment. So not a huge amount in the whole context of the amount of money that we increase. But like I say, there is a competitive market, particularly in the city centre, because we don't own most of the parking within the city centre.
Yes, which is one of the major issues that we face as an authority. So you're suggesting that that £8,500 or so could come from increasing charges for the non-domiciles that both Councillor Corkery and I have talked about previously. Is that correct?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm not suggesting it.
Well, that's what I like to hear. That's excellent. So I think the answer to the question is yes, basically, which is of interest to me. I think that's answered your question, Cal.
Yeah, it has. Thank you. And I mean, from a wider council perspective, I would have thought we wanted to be doing everything in our power to encourage more people to use the park and rides and not kind of be in competition with it by encouraging people to potentially park in the city centre instead. So I think that's definitely something worth looking at. That's all my questions. I've got a few comments which I'll reserve for later on after other people have asked questions.
Okay, that's fine, Cal. Thank you. Scott?
Thank you. I was under the impression that Wayne was going to circulate some information. That's what was said at the start of the meeting.
Yeah,
one of my colleagues has confirmed it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. If you're happy to circulate some information, then feel free. Yeah. Budget amendments. Right. Not a game he should be going down. James, you raised your hand.
Thanks, Darren. So just to kind of confirm what's been passed around. So at the informal briefing, we talked about the potential to look at garages and parking sites. So the officers then did that very same thing that we were asked to do. I think we just need to bear in mind there's a relationship to demand here. So there's always been a preferential charge for, rightly so, for local tenants and leaseholders, which is preserved in the charging structure. We were asked to look at the potential to squeeze out some more income from this area, because those that are using our parking sites that aren't local, travelling into the city, whatever the circumstances are, we see those customers as providing additional income which helps preserve the core services that the HRA provide. So we've always recognised that there's an opportunity to generate income. When we looked at the demand, you'll be pleased to know that despite COVID, the demand for those sites, particularly the, I think they're described as open-air spaces, has been sustained. We can't, crystal ball understand what might happen next, but alongside how they're currently being used, there is a waiting list for those sites as well. So we felt confident in taking the question that you posed at the informal briefing and bringing forward for you a model for your consideration, and that's what's been presented to you now.
Okay, thank you for that. Scott?
No, that's fine. It's just it's made my day, put it that way. We're going to talk about the report because that's fundamentally why we're here. Not for me to get into procedural basis, so I'll park that for now. If we look at the report itself, I'm going to just point to a couple of points that I think it's worth talking about. 4.13 I think is a really key element of the report. It talks about energy costs, repairs budget, pay award. I think they're the three things that are really causing stress and pain, I think, on the budget. What I am going to ask, and it's going to be quite a tough question to answer, is obviously we noted that utility prices have gone up and have been more than doubled in recent months, and we knew that was coming. Why wasn't there any in-year intervention to look at energy prices? Because that is a strain on the budget straight away, and we knew it was going to happen, but we've waited until this point to address it. Was there any in-year work that was looked at by yourselves?
Yes.
Question. What did it look like?
Yeah, we've got new contracts with brokers who are experts in the energy field, and we work closely with them to make sure that we get the best deals in terms of how we buy our energy, both for electricity and gas. The case in point being the electricity heating charges for Tipton Edgbaston, where we've got a 3-year fixed deal on those charges, and we continue to work closely with the brokers in terms of our future energy strategy, in terms of buying in advance so we can get the best deals for our residents.
Right, just a quick one. What would the overall saving have been from fixing those deals? Just so, it's not in the report, and that's why I've asked. So you must have an idea of what you saved in that 3-year period, because it could be significant. Otherwise, this report is considerably different if you hadn't have done what you've done.
No, we fixed those costs for the residents who live in the electrically heated block, Councillor Harris.
Yeah, but, when I say you fixed them, there must be a cost saving compared to what the price would have been to what you fixed it at. So you must know how much money you've saved.
Yeah, these are to the residents who pay their heating charges.
Yeah, I know. But what I'm saying is you must have an idea.
Sorry, Scott, I'm just trying to back you up here.
Yeah.
I think what Scott is after is a number.
Well, I haven't got that number to hand. I could get it. I can get it for you.
It's fine. I'm merely just it's semantics. I know you made a saving. Well done. That's the main thing. And
apologies for intervening, Scott.
No, it's absolutely fine. I know you knew where I was going. Obviously, cost of materials to undertake repairs have been budgeted at 2% inflation. This isn't a new thing. We all knew about this 18 months ago. That there's going to be considerable rises, and obviously we've seen rises between 5 and 15%. And I know that within the budget you have taken a look at that. What concerns me is we're already looking at probably about 14-15% rise already this year, and we're not even at the end of January for repairs and maintenance, and that's only going to soar, I think, to probably about 25% mark. There's no contingency in the budget if the budget is changed today, but there would have been a £400,000 deficit, a surplus, which potentially would be looking at that sort of issue. What I'm going to ask now is, if it is set at 4.1% and we have a £400,000 surplus, do you envision having that surplus at the end of the budget year, or do you realistically think it's going to get eaten up in about 3 months?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I keep trying to say it that the £400,000 is a very small percentage when you compare it to our £90 million cost base. Yeah. So a fluctuation in our salaries by say 0.5% is about £165,000, for example. So if we've got that wrong, if things happen around repairs and maintenance and prices continue to increase and demand goes up as well, then again £400,000 doesn't give you an awful lot of resilience.
Well, I'm going to say it's less than 0.5% of the overall budget. So if your overall budget fluctuates by less than 0.5%, we're up the creek, so to speak, again, and we're going to be again another year in deficit. So I think when you make the decision today, Councillor Sanders, I think you've got to be wary of all the things that are at play. I know that if you were to say rise the rent and keep it into a surplus, the highest you could rise it would be 3.5%, if I'm right. So that would leave a £28,000 surplus from the numbers that I've got.
Yeah.
So realistically, that leaves you in 0.001% chance of a budget of going back into deficit. So effectively what we're talking about today is we're going to be setting the budget and we're going to be in deficit again. That's the reality. Regardless of any decision that Councillor Sanders makes at 4.1 or 3.5, there's going to be a budget deficit at the end of the year in the HRA. Is that fair to say? Despite the fact that you're going to try and put a £400,000 surplus, you've just said literally any sort of fluctuation, that's gone.
Potentially, but I don't have a crystal ball. So
I don't either, but I could tell you it's going to be gone, and we all know it's going to be gone by the time we get to the following year. I mean, this is why I said it, as I said it in the press, I don't envy the position Councillor Sanders is in, because either decision he makes, you're going to be in deficit. That's the reality, which is why I think actually, I mean, I've made a note of here if there have been other efficiency drives within the department, and I think that needs to be an ongoing theme, because currently that is the way to get the cost base down, is through efficiency savings. And I think we all together need to look at a longer term way to actually get that down, rather than short term quick fixes. I mean, rent rise is a quick and easy way to do it, but actually I think as an overall department we need to look at working differently potentially and doing things slightly differently to get the cost base down, because that is what's going to cause us to be in deficit again next year and the following year and the following year. And that's nobody's fault. That's the nature of where we are within the cycle of the HRA. It's very difficult decisions to make, and I think we all agree with that. And from the report I can see, I think the actual report itself is actually a very good report from the officers. They've laid out a lot of the issues that are arising. If anything, I think it's been a little bit too conservative. I think you could have probably been a bit harder about what's coming down the line, because I think it's going to be a lot more, I think the numbers would be higher. Personally, that's me speaking with a slightly different hat on. I think you're going to see inflation keep rising. I think you're going to see some more issues in repairs and maintenance. I think they're going to go up considerably, like I've just said, about 25%. So what I want to know from yourself, more so you, Wayne, sorry I'm putting you on the spot, is what do we do if we're 3 months down the line and we're already saying the surplus is wiped out? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, so said earlier on, there is a reserve that we can use, which would be the first call on the deficit. But obviously, we as officers, if we saw that happening, and depending on what it was, we'll try and do it. So that might be procuring our energy better if we're able to. It might be, putting in different procurement strategies for our supply chain on repairs and maintenance. And we could actually have a look at the service, and we continually have, every month we have a deficit reduction meeting to try and look at different ways in which we can save money for the HRA, so that we don't have to come here and say we're putting our rents by the maximum amount.
You did say earlier, though, we cannot continually keep dipping into the reserves, because the reserves will eventually be gone. And that's the point I'm getting at, because sooner or later you're going to keep going to the well and the well's going to be empty. And that's when we have a problem, and that's where I think we need to be, as an organisation, looking at the HRA slightly differently. You've probably got 3 councillors in here that actually do really care about the housing stock and actually care about how the portfolio is run. And I mean, I say that from an opposition point of view. Councillor Sanders makes the decisions, but I know myself and Councillor Corker are very passionate about residents and ensuring that they're getting the best value for money, but also ensuring that actually we as a council are ensuring that we are getting the best value for money as well. So I think it's something that, it's not a nice conversation to have, and I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. Actually, I'm not sorry. That's me being. I'm telling lies, Wayne. I don't apologise about this sort of thing. It's more so about ensuring that we're doing the right things, and I think the deficit reduction board that you go once a month, I think that might be to have some input from yourself, Councillor Sanders, that we actually get some input on that as well. Because if you could follow things around between the 3 of us, we might actually be able to. I don't know, we might even be able to help. You never know, we could have some good ideas. I've got loads. So it's a case in point that while I don't envy the decision you're going to make, I really don't. I think you've got a choice between a £28,000 surplus or a £400,000 surplus. Either way, you're not going to have it in 4 months' time, I don't think. But I'm going to just put it over to you now, because I've spoken enough.
You're very kind. Thank you. And I think I think the key thing from my perspective is constantly learning and constantly understanding how things change. Scott, you and I both know that we've both talked about the need for longer term stuff. I'll come back to some of my more specific comments when I do the summing up of the discussion. But I think that there is a need constantly to change and evolve, and we do know what's coming. But we've had several discussions around this sort of area before, and I have to say 3 of us have usually wound up agreeing, which is a deep shock to everyone. But it's a very valid point, just as Cal's points were very valid earlier. I have no questions as such, so I'm now happy to move to the comments side of things. Maria, did you have any comments at all? No? Scott this time.
Thank you. I mean, only to echo the comment, I mean, I went into comments earlier, so...
If you've made them already, that's absolutely fine. So.
That's fine, I'm just going to do it briefly. I think the position is unenviable, I think, from yourself making the decision and from us sitting here, because realistically, the anticipated rent rise was going to be 2.5%. The figures have changed to the point where it's going to be 4.1 is what's the recommendation in the paper. You know, there's many things we can do in terms of, we could raise it 4.1%, we could raise it 3.5%. I think it fundamentally comes down to the service itself and the service and what we deliver and how we deliver it, because that's how we're going to have to make in-year savings within the HRA. I think and I mean, I'm not passing the baton over to the officers, but you guys are going to be the ones that will be looking for those in-year savings. And you're going to, oh sorry James, I can see you nodding and the pressure's already coming on top. But that's where it's going to have to come to, because I think the realistic position is the £400,000 surplus, or the £28,000 surplus, will be gone very quickly. I mean, that's realistic. I think that's the working assumption. And that's the way that I would be looking at it. If it was me in charge of the service, I'd be looking at bridging that gap as soon as possible. And, you know, it's down to you to point out those efficiency savings, to point out changes to services, potentially. That's not get rid of services, that's change them, make them slicker, make them faster, make them more agile. And that is to shape the service in a different way, because I think the world is changing significantly. You know, and there are some real cost savings to be made out there. And I think as an not just as the HRA, but as an organisation, I think we need to look at that as well. So I think functional change within the service is going to be important moving forward. And while this rent rise is a small part of it, I think there's a much bigger picture to be unfolded and to be looked at. And that's what I would be suggesting. I mean, what you do with the rent rise, Councillor Sanders, is down to yourself. You know, I have my views, but it's not my decision to make, so I'm quite happy for that one to fall on your shoulders. But I do think there is an opportunity to some real big picture thinking, so you look at the service slightly differently and how we deliver it. And I really hope that we can see that in the next 12 months. And I do think we have got the talent in the room, and we certainly have got the talent in the officers to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Scott. Cal.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just touch, I guess, on some of the points I was trying to refer to earlier in the questions. I think, firstly, in terms of the decision that's taken for us today, what I would strongly encourage is that it's looked at how we can cap, or that we should cap, any increase, any cash increase to people who are living in affordable rent properties at the equivalent cash amount that the people in social rent tenancies would pay. So whether it's 4.1%, 3.5% or whatever, if people in social rent are paying that, the cash amount should be the upper limit of what people in more expensive tenancies are paying. And I think that's important, firstly, in fairness. Obviously, people are already paying considerably higher rents for potentially an identical property. But also, if we continue to increase both sets of rents at the same percentage, the impact of compound interest over kind of 3 or 4 or 5 years is mean that gap between the two rents is going to increase significantly, and affordable rents are just going to run away potentially, obviously subject perhaps to them being capped at LHA rates, but we don't know what's going to happen to the local housing allowance. It may be that it's uprated again as it was over the course of the pandemic. I do think it's important that we take the opportunity to introduce a hardship fund for council tenants. I have lost track of the amount of times I've visited people in their homes and they've been in severe financial hardship. People often move into properties where there's no proper flooring. People are without the basics such as white goods, cookers, etc. People quite often experience crises in their life that puts them in particular hardship. I know there are other grants out there available occasionally. I know there's the local welfare assistance, I think it's called at the moment, which has become available, but that is a limited amount which is available to everyone. I guess the argument I was making is that we should take the example set by other social housing providers operating within our city to allocate a portion of people's rents and service charges that's put aside so that when housing officers or councils or whoever come across people that are in real dire need, actually there's a pot of cash there that people can dip into and help them out. And quite often it doesn't need a massive amount. It could be that £100, £150 for a bit of carpet or a kind of second-hand white goods may make all the difference to that person. And I appreciate there are services available to help people maximise their incomes through money advice. I used to work as a money advisor, so I know very well how that works, and that can provide significant benefits to people in terms of maximising their incomes, etc. But what it doesn't do is help them there and then on that day when they may be in real needs. And I come across this all the time in terms of casework of visiting people and then ringing up the housing office or the housing officer to say, look, this person has moved into this property, they haven't got any carpet down, they haven't got a cooker, what can we do? And the responses are, we'll have to go and see what grants are available, so if we can apply for it, they might get something in a couple of weeks. For me, that isn't good enough, and we have the potential to make a political choice, essentially, to put some money aside out of people's rents so that there's cash there and then available when people really need it. And I do feel quite strongly about that, because I think it's a relatively simple choice that we could make out of a budget of £90 million per year to put a small fraction of that aside so that when people really need it, it's available there to help them. In terms of parking, I appreciate the revised figures. I still think that probably doesn't go far enough, because all the revised proposals do is make the charge for parking in the city centre equivalent to the park and rides. Now, any kind of basic understanding of economics or behavioural economics, we need to make it more expensive to park in the city centre in order to change people's behaviour to encourage them to use the park and ride. So I would go further than £14 a week. I would say £16, £18 a week. Let's really try and hit people in the pocket, make them rethink their behaviours and encourage people to use the park and ride. And of course there is the link question to that, is whether the park and ride is too expensive, which I would also probably argue for, but I appreciate that's another portfolio. And just lastly, in terms of the overall rent increases, Chair, I think 4.1% is too high. People are already paying through the nose through energy. People are already seeing their other bills and cost of living go through the roof. And what they don't need is another 4.1% on top of that in terms of their rent. I would strongly encourage the alternative figure of a balanced budget of 3.5%, but I think we can even go lower. I think we can go 3 or 3.1%. Yes, that may put us to an in-year deficit, but we can do that. You can make the choice to have an in-year deficit and to use up some of that £23 million in reserve. Now, my understanding of the point of reserve is that it's there for exceptional circumstances when something completely out of the blue happens. Now, COVID and the cost of living crisis is, for me, exceptional circumstances and exactly the time when we should be putting our hands in our pocket, using up those reserves to really help the people that need it. So I think overall I'm kind of supportive of what the budget's trying to do, trying to keep the services going. I think on the whole the housing services are run very well, and the more money is kind of apportioned as it should be. But I do think there are some relatively minor things we can do to how we're spending money, and perhaps to look at spending a little bit more money in the year to come that could make a big difference to some of the people on the lowest incomes living within our housing stock.
Scott.
Thank you. Just on the notion of the hardship fund, I just had a quick thought, and I don't know if it's something for officers to actually investigate, and that would be potentially speaking to the people at the Hive, because they've got so many local links to, I mean, Cal made some points about carpet, white goods, and, you know, the Hive have a lot of outreach to lots of organisations, so I don't know whether it's worth having a link up with those to see if we can actually get some sort of link to look at white goods, for example, where they can take white goods and deliver it, because I know the Hive did some very good work during COVID of getting lots of things delivered to people, which I found quite extraordinary, and we might not be able to fund it, but we might be able to find some organisation that could fund it and get us out of a bit of a hole. So I think there's an opportunity open there to look into, and I'll pass it to James, because he clearly wants to say something about it.
I will as well before I kick in, but James, you go first because we're being polite here.
Thank you. I was just going to confirm we can certainly have those conversations. In fact, the HRA supports the Moving On project in kind, and I take Councillor Corkery's points. Partly what Councillor Corkery was highlighting was an issue when people first move into properties and whether we can do more there around white goods, carpeting and so on. And that's precisely the link that we're trying to foster with the Moving On project to support that. So not a full answer to whether or not we have a hardship fund, but certainly something we can do more with.
That's fine. I didn't want to obviously talk about the Moving On project because I already knew that they were involved, but I thought that was generally for people that were coming from homelessness and they were going into property. I didn't, obviously not just people moving around or they've had some issues. That's great, but it's just another option. Just also something that Councillor Corkery said about the budget, and it's more so just a question that I just want to get confirmed. Can we legally set a budget that would be in deficit?
Yes, you can. But
why wouldn't you?
Sorry?
But you're going to tell me why you wouldn't?
Yeah, well, for the reasons you've stated as well in this meeting, that you can't continue to set a budget in deficit. So at the moment, the way the budget is almost written is, if we set a budget and it's a £500,000 deficit, you say, well, your income and expenditure, your expenditure exceeds your income by £500,000, and the way that you'll balance the budget is you will draw down from reserves £500,000. And we're able to do that today. So you can legally set it, but what you can't, if you want the housing revenue account to be here still in 10, 20, 30 years time, you can't continue to do that.
So if you were to continue to do that, Wayne, what would happen?
We don't have money.
Then we wouldn't have a housing revenue account that was controlled by Portsmouth. We might have to sell it off.
Would we go bust effectively?
The housing revenue account will go into deficit, and that's illegal.
I just thank you for confirming that.
Thank you for that, Scott. On your first point, sorry, you just sort of beat me to it, basically. I mean, I was talking to Hive this afternoon about trying to improve the city, and you're right, also the moving, because some of the things Cal was talking about, which is about people who are moving in with carpets and stuff, is something we as a Lib Dem administration have been looking at from the general fund perspective in terms of setting up white goods, building on what Conservative colleagues did when they ran the council. So there is that, but I think the fair point is around trying to improve those what they call synergies and links and stuff, because MOP can do some of the things that Cal was talking about. And I had someone ring me up and go, can I give them stuff? And so which I'm happy to help them with.
Yeah, this is I think the hardship fund idea that Councillor Corkery has brought up is quite it's generally a good idea. It's just how do we get there? And I think the idea of the Hive with the synergy and with MOP, I think if we can bring these people together, we could do it in a way that actually it benefits a lot of people. And I think what Cal's trying to get at is a really good idea. It's just how do we do it?
And that's what I will return to that as I trundle along my own thoughts about this. And again, I want to return to something which I raised at the start, which is that Scott's quote in the paper, he doesn't envy my position, and I don't envy my position either, I have to say. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Energy prices are going through the roof. Frankly, other prices are going through the roof. There is a national insurance tax rise, or there might not be a national insurance tax rise, but at the moment we have to budget for a national insurance tax rise. And so what I've got to do is to return to some first principles when taking that unenviable decision. And my first principles are making sure that we are guided by, its first principle is guided by the evidence. And the evidence to me is we've got a third of people who are on full housing benefit, a third of people who are on no housing benefit, and a third of people who are on housing benefit in work. And that's it. And that last group is being particularly hit by energy prices and by the use of national insurance, as opposed to income tax, as Liberal Democrats want, or windfall taxes, as the Labour Party wants, to fund the health and social care backlog. And so for me, to set a rent level of 4.1%, although it is financially the most prudent thing to do, is to me not right. However, where I do agree with Scott, as he well knows, is that you can't use rent rises to sort out your long-term deficit reduction. That's to me is wrong and offends one of my first principles. When we came back in 2018, for instance, I started the process of actually having various interventions to try and do all the things that you talked about. So, for instance, the team had just started a discussion around voids, because to my mind, too many homes were empty for too long. That work has continued over the last few years. It got held up by the virus, sadly, but it has now done that, and I hope that is part of the package of other things. The team also know that I am keen to make sure that we can continue to reduce the deficit through looking at continued efficiencies and also changing the way we work. I think one of the joys of the systems thinking approach is it enables you to change the way you work, and actually you tend to save money as a result. It's not where you start from, but it is the outcome. I would also say, though, Scott, that we are also facing problems that come not from us, but from the, I think, poor decisions of governments. We're still affected by the loss of money from the 2015 to 2018, if memory serves me right, rent cuts, 1% rent cuts for social rents, and that has removed a fair amount of money from our budgets. We're living with that. It's much less than it was, but it is still there. I would love to freeze or cut rents this year, because I think the cost of living crisis is so great. However, I have to make sure that we have a prudent approach. We can't have jam today for pain tomorrow. Because it won't be us who pay. Well, it might be Cal who pays, because he lives in the council block. It might be my mum who pays, because my mum lives in the council block. But we can't have jam today and pain tomorrow. And that's why I think that idea of what my preference would be, which is much lower rent rises or even rent freezes, is just financially stupid. And I'm not prepared to tolerate that. I'm interested, so from Scott's point of view, it is around looking at the long term. Yes, we've been doing that. We will continue to do that. Should we put forward, should we just rely on putting up people's rents to sort the problem? Absolutely not. And I actually think a lower rent rise would paradoxically help encourage that approach, in fact, because it would indicate that we wouldn't necessarily do that. When it comes to Cal's arguments, and many of them I understand and I support, again, I think the idea with the longer term issues that we face around depreciation of our stock, which is going to affect us and which is a significant issue coming down the track, with many of our properties coming towards the end of their life, that's an issue that we've got to face. We won't face it over the next 12 months, but we will face it over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And that's why I think we cannot have a jam today and pain tomorrow approach. With the hardship fund, I would say that is always under review, and I think utilising other organisations that do the sort of things you've been talking about means we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's particularly crucial at this time. With regards to parking charges, as I've said, I think that it's essential that we don't punish those people unnecessarily who are our tenants, our leaseholders, and who live nearby with parking charges. But commuters, I think it's right that we increase the differentials that we brought in. With regards to the affordable rent and the social rent, as I've said previously, as far as I know, no other housing association has indicated that approach. I may be wrong, and also no council has indicated that approach. And that says to me that I understand the arguments, and again, all the arguments are put under review. I think at this time, then a sensible way forward is to have a single approach to that. So therefore, turning to the report, I propose the following alterations. In recommendation 3, I propose that we replace everything after the word of with 3.5%, as that is a rent rise that generates a zero surplus, or a £28,000 surplus, I should say, in this financial year. I'm also happy to go with the parking charges proposal as laid out by Wayne, but someone may have to tell me exactly how that can happen under the recommendation of recommendation 9. Wayne.
I think our Democratic Services colleague might be able to explain it probably better than I can. Can we just, I've got an amendment to the report. So we'll just, it'll get picked up in the minutes of the meeting.
Right.
This is the sticking point. This is what I was getting at earlier. I don't think you can do it because of the manner of how it's been presented. Because effectively, the information in the report, the table that you have given for the parking charges is fundamentally different to the one that you've given me here, effectively. So what you've done, you've made an amendment to the report recommendation based on the information which in the report is not correct. You can attach the new information, but what you'd have to do, you'd have to rewrite the amendment to say, including appendix blah, 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 which you haven't done. So effectively, this means nothing, and you can't circulate an amendment now. So what you could do, effectively, if you want to be clever, and I'll help you out on this, is come back to the next meeting and table it then, and we can do it then as a slight amendment. But you can't do it until then, because that effectively would be open subject to being called in, because what you've done, have rewritten the report in the meeting. And I'm absolutely right, I know I am.
James.
Look, I'm not the monitoring officer. I'm just trying to see a way through, because at informal briefing you were minded to ask us to model. That's the information we presented. But I understand the points that are being made. My understanding here is that the decision you make today is subject to notice in any event. So there's a process that follows this meeting, and we would need to notify those individuals that have parking and so on. The alternative here is that you are minded to agree the principle that we move forward with a differential charge and delegate that decision as may be appropriate in the report to me to work with officers to understand what that means in practical terms, and then we'll use the normal process to introduce that change. I don't know if members would be happy to see that happen.
It's not so much not being happy, it's a question of process. Yeah, the process has to be on, and with the greatest respect, in the briefing I did say, if you go down this route of tabling in the meeting, I would have this conversation, and you table it in the meeting, and I have had this conversation. So it was avoidable, and it's quite simple in how to do it. You can't do it in this manner, because you're materially changing the report based on new information. That's where it comes down to.
I understand that.
And it's a financial decision as well.
I understand that point. I'm going to come back to what I said earlier. So, for instance, the 2019-2020 council budget, forget the housing budget.
It's a very different process.
Was decided in the meeting.
It's a very different process, Councillor Sanders, because the council budget setting, the cash limits are set, effectively is what you're doing here is slightly different, because you're raising a fee based on the decision that you're making. It's a cash limit. And to be fair, the council budget comes under a different part of the constitutional framework.
And you can understand, as I said, I understand your process, and I'm going there. There are other ways. I personally have a scrutiny run on in the administration budget, but the opposition budgets as well, because I want the city to understand the alternatives. And I quite like that idea. Wayne.
Okay, so Councillor Pater Harris is exactly right. The full council budget is very different, because it has to be voted in by full council. Right. In this report, though, and you look at the second paragraph in the report, it says that full council have delegated the decision to set charges and rents to you as the cabinet holder. So the report is brought forward from us. This is what we're asking you to recommend. It's your decision, ultimately, because you've got that delegated power to make any decision you like in the meeting on setting the rents and charges as it's written in here.
But on that point, and I'm just going to make the point now, and this is where it falls down, and this is where I think the process has not been followed. Had you have not tabled this and put it on the agenda with the new information effectively saying rents are going to, the parking charges are going to go up to £14, had the cabinet member just said, okay, well, I've looked at the report, I don't like the parking, I'm going to put it up to £14 and made the amendment, that's fine. But as soon as you produce a table showing that is fundamentally different to what I've got in Appendix 9. And not only is it fundamentally different, it's fundamentally different to whatever the residents that are living in those areas or commuting in have any choice of saying. And once that happens, they've got no way to scrutinise, and that is where it falls down. Because effectively, if you look in the constitutional document, residents have rights. to look at documents and to be able to scrutinise. And what you've done there in that instance is take that away from them. So it should have either been published beforehand to say this is a proposed change so you could actually see the difference, and then they would effectively been able to turn up and give a deputation. And it comes back to the same, it's effectively the same point. So you've got a choice. You can do it and it's going to be open to scrutiny, or you can just do it another time. It's up to you.
James.
So can I just come I just come back to the impact is on non-tenants and leaseholders. That's an important point. It's a specific cohort. So it's not the same as our tenants and leaseholders. It's a specific cohort. You could, I think, should you wish to, is make the decision on all of the parking charges at 3.1, and we could then isolate those that you're minded to see an increase, and separate those from the rest of the report and come back to you at a further decision meeting. Should you wish to. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm not coming at it from a constitutional point of view. It's up to you.
I have to say, when Wayne said Scott was right, I think that was enough. James, I think that is a very sensible approach, and I think that single approach, with a note in the minutes that I am minded to accept the principle of what has been outlined, which I think I know I can do. I think is probably the least worst option available, but it has to come back to the next meeting, because what I don't want to do is be hanging around in March and then waiting for times to happen. But I want colleagues to know that I'm minded to do that for the green reasons that Councillor Corkery and I both share. And also for fairness as well.
I think we all share those green reasons, to be honest.
I'm delighted. I want that right. Thank you very much. Anna, is that clear?
Yeah, it's all going to be agreed with the amendment.
So number 8 is agreed, but it's part of the minutes. I am minded to increase the parking charges by more for those people who do not live in or near HRA properties, and a report outlining how that will be done, which may or may not be the same as what Wayne has just put forward, will be brought back to the next meeting for a decision, as that is the constitutionally most secure position. Any dissenters speak now, forever hold your peace.
Oh, I can live with that.
Right, and as for the rest, I agree. With those 2 amendments, I agree. So thank you very much, colleagues, for that. And thank you very much for the passion that's been outlined in all of this, which is really helpful. City Fibre. Right.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. The report that's in front of you is information only. It's an update report on the initial report that I brought to Housing Cabinet this time last year. The purpose of the report is to recap on the background and the benefits to residents for the installation of full fibre across HRA communal properties. And also details the progress that's been made, the key milestone progress that's been made during the past 12 months since the original report was tabled. The first sections 3 and 4 give the background and the benefits to the report, and it's information that was previously talked through when we presented the report in January 21. So I draw your attention to section 5, which is the progress update section, and if I read through from the report and from my notes. So 15th of February last year, PCC entered into a non-exclusive wayleave with City Fibre, so that enables City Fibre to have access rights across our communal properties, and that was to install the infrastructure and maintain the full fibre across the common areas of our buildings. We met with City Fibre soon after that and set up the various protocols in terms of the information they need to supply with us, the sign-off processes, etc., the route route packs, and also to identify the dedicated resources both for City Fibre and for Portsmouth City Council that would manage the operational and day-to-day works on our stock. I chair a quarterly meeting with the regional manager for City Fibre, and we discuss. I think we met 3 times, or certainly twice. The next meeting is next month, and we discuss, the risks of the project, the progress, any issues that need to be resolved, any serious feedback from residents, councillors in terms of how the work is progressing. I think the key thing to mention is that during the 12 months of the project, we've installed, I think, nearly to across nearly 200 blocks and approaching 2,000 individual residents. We've had no issues of concern, and where there has been poor communication, that's been picked up very quickly by Portsmouth City Council's team, and City Fibre have responded to any requests, changes in terms of the letters, the updates that they need to undertake. We had an editorial piece article in the November, the Christmas edition of House Talk, which was circulated to 14,500 HRA residents, and we set out really as an update and a promotion of the work that we were doing with City Fibre, and again extolled the benefits of what that could mean for residents across the city. And we'll continue to make sure that we communicate with residents across the city in terms of what we're doing and the progress we've been making. Within the report, there's an Appendix A, and that details the properties that we've completed to date, that are in progress, and also that we've got identified for installation for the first quarter of this year. Discussions with City Fibre, they're pleased that they've hit their programme, working closely with teams within building services about hitting their programme of numbers, and they've got a significant number, 2,000 properties that they're looking to complete next year. When I spoke to City Fibre back in just before Christmas, they'd had 29 customers sign up for the full fibre through their internet service providers, and I'll have a briefing update now next month, which will give me the latest figures in terms of PCC residents that have signed up to full City Fibre. And the last point, 5.9, I'd like to draw your attention to as well, Councillor Sanders, in terms of this staff that both City Fibre and their build partner CCN, that 70% of City Fibre's staff are Portsmouth based and live in Portsmouth, and 109 of CCN's staff live in Portsmouth as well. CCN is also a local company as well, and City Fibre have made great progress as well in terms of they've got apprentices working from, and also they've got some ex-military personnel working from as well, which I know is is a key and a key requirement for City Council projects as well. So they're pleased to acknowledge that and report that as part of this update.
That's very kind of you, Maria. Thank you very much indeed. Maria, did you have anything?
Yes, I've looked through the list of properties that you've already done and that you're going to be doing, and I can't see any mention of Handsworth or Ladywood.
Yeah, this is the project, Maria, will last. The project period is from April 2021 and will end at the end of 2024. So it works in conjunction with the installations that are happening all over Portsmouth as we speak. And so at the moment, the properties that we've got listed here are the ones that we've completed, works in progress, and we've only got the first quarter of 2022. So as the programme develops across the rest of the city, Handsworth and all of our other communal blocks will be worked on as well.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you for that, Maria. I have to say, for other kind member of the public, there are courts blocks in here, in this list, so they will be getting broadband, because we know there's a big problem with people not being able to work from home and stuff like that, so that's already in this list. So Crown Court is in this list, and Wimpole Court and King Albert is in this list as well. So Cal, much of this is in your ward. Any comments or questions?
No, only to welcome the report and thank those who've been involved in bringing it forward. I think kind of extending the mega fast broadbands, or whatever the correct technical term, to more people is only going to help going forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Cal. Scott?
Yeah, I echo those comments. I mean, to be fair, it's a good project, and I'm glad that City Fibre aren't blocking roads or anything now. They seem to have got their act together, which is great. I see Meredith nodding. He's happy as well because he's not getting complaints. No, it's just a good project, and obviously more people can have access to broadband and more people are working from home. It makes a lot of sense, so long may it continue.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I echo those comments. I think for me, it's around bridging the digital divide. I think one of the interesting things we found when we're actually, as a lived administration, when we looked at the stats around kids having to be forced to be educated at home, is how few of them actually had the broadband that was required to make them work from home, which is one of the reasons why I was asking about how we could speed this up and how we could do it without some of the concerns that I think all councillors have had around some of the antics of City Fibre in some of the roads in the city. But anything that will breach the digital divide is useful, and that's why I wanted it to come back. It's a long programme, and if anybody's got any complaints, then please send that through to yourselves. And also, I have to say, I'm delighted that so many people working there in the PO1 to PO7 postcodes, what they call social value or local labour, is really, really important. And that's also really, really good news. But all in all, well done. And if there are any problems, yell. If that's reasonable. So with that, I think I will close the meeting at 6 minutes past 6. Thank you very much for your patience, colleagues.